Okay, good morning, everybody. I say that feeling a little weird because some of you may not be watching it in the morning, might be in the afternoon or the evening. But my name's Nathan Dovey from Stennis Coast Farmers, and today I will be talking about non-wetting soil management options for growers in the Albany Port Zone. So this is 2021 was the second year of our project that is being led by Southern Dirt and invested in by the GRDC. So the background is we basically focus our trial site on a forest gravel soil at Tenterden. So non-wettings, probably the major constraint in that particular area, particularly west of the Albany Highway. Many growers are using wetting agents to improve moisture penetration and then germination. And it seems to be the soil type that has the most consistent response. So yeah, I think that's reasonably well known. Having said that, there's still responses can be inconsistent. The products are reasonably expensive, so there's still hesitation about some growers in terms of adopting wetting agents and when to use them. So I guess the question is there a better way? And how much difference are the wetters actually making in terms of grain yield? So this particular photo was taken early in the morning on the 6th of May. We're out there seeding the plots, which I'll tell you more about in a second. So it had about an inch of rain, 25 mil overnight, and you could still see it there clearly. Just to your right, you can see it part of the gravel pit. So you're seeing the water really struggling to penetrate. It's been a pretty steady rain overnight. So what did we actually do? So 2020, it's about a 5 hectare trial, was sown to canola, and in wheat we followed up. In 2021 we followed up with wheat, and we applied the following treatments. So obviously in Untreated Control, we put SC14 directly on the canola seed in 2020. So 2 litres per tonne and 4 litres per tonne. So if you work that back, you know, the sowing rate would have been less than 5 kilos per hectare of canola, but it's a very minuscule amount of SC14. So low risk, high reward potentially if it was to work. Then we use the farmer's sort of current liquid injection setup, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. But 2 litres of SC14 behind the press wheel on top of the furrow. We doubled that rate to 4, and then we did a few combos. So we did 2 litres per tonne of SC14 directly on the seed, and then a little bit of SC14 behind the press wheel. And then for the 2 litres per hectare behind the seed boot and the 4 litres behind the seed boot, we actually set up a temporary liquid injection kit. So we borrowed that off Elders. So you strap a 200 litre tank on there, you mix up your brew, you calibrate it. You calibrate it to the speed of the seeder, obviously, and you put the pipes on about 8 tines, which worked out for about 2 metres of width for us, and then we're able to seed that just over that 2 metre strip. And again, so then we had a combination of behind the seed boot with our little temporary kit. And then obviously applied 1 litre behind the press wheel with the farmer setup. That went over the width of the bar, but when we measured yields, we obviously just measured the 2 metres that we had the treatment on, if that makes sense. Doubled the rate. So, and then the final product there was a product from BASF, where you combine two ingredients, integrate and agri, at varying ratios depending on what your soil tests say. You get a recommendation from them, and then you put it out. So that's what we did as well. So just sort of show you on here, you can see the Websters or the Beeches, how they applied their current sort of setup applies the wetting agent, and plus they have trace elements and some water going, you know, behind the press wheel directly on the furrow. So our trial site, we had 11 treatments in total, which you saw on the previous page. 3 replicates, you know, 10.4 metre seeder. Because it was canola in 2020, the plots that we could harvest with the farmer's machine we did. And then where we had to do those 2 metre strips, we got a small plot harvester in, which not ideal, but it's a farm scale trial. We just did the best we could to try and get an accurate measure of yield in 2020. 2020, it says 22, that's incorrect, but in 2021 we used a small plot harvester on the wheat for every plot, so it was nice and consistent. Yes, very much a bony forest gravel soil, molarity of ethanol droplet tests, which is basically just a measure of non-wetting. Look it up or Google it if you want to know more info. But they came in at 3.4 to 3.6, which is severe to very severe for non-wetting, which won't be any surprise to any of the Tenterden locals on those really gravelly soils. So one of the first measurements was just good old-fashioned plant counts with canola, obviously being small seeded. Yeah, we're obviously able to get a pretty good measure just by counting the plants and see what emerges. Just going to look at the other screen there because that little one's a bit small for me. So untreated control, basically what we found here, if you know what these little letters mean, basically any common letters between treatments mean they're not statistically significant. So in terms of the untreated control, you've got A to E. The only 2 letters that are not common, the only 2 treatments that are not common with the untreated control are the 2 litres of SC14 behind the seed boot and the 4 litres of SC14 behind the seed boot. So if you compare the same rates to, think back to that picture behind the press wheel, it looks like there's a distinct improvement there from actually placing the SC14 closer to the seed under the ground rather than on top. According to this, the treatment on seed wasn't very good. 4 litres on seed looks poor. I actually remember that because I was out there, looked at when we put 4 litres on there, it actually made the canola seed quite sticky. So there's probably every chance we didn't put as many plants down there. So that would probably explain why that's actually, it's not significant, but looks lower than the untreated control. And then we had the combination which we looked at. So we put some SC14 behind the tine, then behind the press wheel. So we did that at 1 and 1 litre and 2 and 2. So you would have hoped the 2 and 2, or you would have thought the higher rates of SC14 would have been your top treatments, but that didn't necessarily come out here. And the BOCF product, at least in this trial anyway, wasn't significantly different from the untreated control. So the takeaway from that we came up with was really it looked like SC14 was much more effective when we place it closer to the seed behind the seed boot. And I think if you talk to the guys at Socoa and about some of their internal research they've done, I think they have come up with the same conclusion. So that was nice to come up with independently. So early biomass. So this is a percentage of ground cover. So we flew the drone a couple of times. This particular set of data was from the 28th of July in 2020. And basically it was assumed if it was green, it was a canola plant, and if it wasn't, it was dirt. So the untreated control down at 26%. In terms of just looking at it intuitively, what's higher? Again, same as the germination, we've got the 2 litres of SC14 behind the seed boot and the 4 litres behind the seed boot being higher, which looks to be significant. And again, if you look over at the combination of the 1 and 1 and the 2 and 2, the 2 and 2 you would have thought might have been higher, but that was at 42%, so still quite a good treatment. Yeah, and when I dug into a little bit deeper on that, I found out that 2 of those 3 replicates were sown off-row, which I'm going to tell you a bit more about in a second. But what does it all matter if it doesn't affect the actual yield? So in terms of the canola yield in 2020, did our best to sort of mitigate some of those differences in the harvesters, etc., through the stats and add that to the analysis. But basically, it was 2.15 tonne to the hectare for the untreated control, and none of the other treatments yielded higher than that. Do I think there was a negative effect from the treatments? No, I don't think so. It's just sort of natural variation. Basically saying that, yeah, we just I guess our interpretation of it was that there was enough plants there for the canola to compensate and grow that sort of low 2-ton crop. And as we all know, canola is a great compensator. Possibly with a dry year, etc., you may have been more likely to see differences if you had that difference in plant numbers and early biomass. But at Tenterden, we certainly didn't see a difference. You can see here the 4 litres on the seed is significantly lower than the untreated control, but again, that was probably that stickiness of the application that we were dealing with. So yeah, and I suppose the other key point is a couple of those what we thought were good treatments with the other measurements are actually well below the untreated control as well. So what does all that mean? Well, one other expected result, which was quite a big influence on the trial and ended up sort of changing our focus a little bit, was by chance the seeder either sowed on last year's furrow or close to it, which we're calling near row, or off row, which is right in the dry interrow. So what we did is we looked at every one of the 33 plots and gave it an assessment of whether it was off row, near row, on row, ignored the treatment or the wetter treatment, and then just looked at these early biomass data, based on that. And look, we did the stats on that, and there was a significant difference. So off row, I'll show you a picture in a second, which is pretty interesting, but off row was significantly lower than near row, and then on row was a tiny bit higher than the near row. Not statistically different, but higher. So that was some really interesting food for thought. We also just looked at the canola yield. So those same yields from before, or that same raw data, if you ignored the wetting agents that we put on there, and then just did the yields that way, off-row canola yielded 1.65 tonne to the hectare, near row was 2.06, and on-row was 1.93. So pretty good correlation between those two sets of data there. So that was quite interesting. Wasn't exactly what we set out to find, but that happens sometimes with research. So this photo, some of you may have seen on online. We put it out there, and we used this photo to help advertise a field walk we had back in 2020, and I think we had about 60 odd people turn up to this field walk to probably see some of these results. So what we've got here is probably a couple of our best treatments in combination versus a couple, accidentally by the way, a couple of the worst right next to each other. So right here we've got 2 litres of SC14 behind the tine, so placed close to the seed, and it's seeded on row. To the right, we've still got the 2 litres of SC14, but it's sown off row, and it's also placed, as you saw with Michael Webster's seeder before, placed behind the press wheel and just dribbling out on top of the furrow. So that photo is really night and day. It certainly motivated Michael Webster to go out and get a hold of a Pro Tracker and install it on his tractor ready for the 2021 growing season, seeing things like that. And it wasn't the only plots where we saw that sort of difference, but that's obviously one of the best that we saw. So what did we do in 2021? We didn't do a lot at Stirlingster Coast in terms of taking many other assessments other than the grain yield. So Michael was able to seed directly over the same plots from 2020 with wheat, with the Pro Tracker, but he didn't install it, or didn't have it running, just to sort of let the bar sway around as per normal. And then we got a trial harvester in, and we went and found those 2 metre strips, which was a challenge, but actually I'm very confident we actually found the exact 2 metre strips from where we'd applied the certain treatments that had that temporary liquid kit in 2020. And basically we didn't add any wetters this year. We wanted to see if there's any residual benefit in the second year. And the reason behind that is Glenn McDonald from Deep Herd and a few others suspect, and even farmers that I've spoken to suspect, that they're non-wetting in their soils. The soil wettability has sort of got better year after year if they continue to use wetters, but that's hard to prove, and that's what we were trying to do. What do we find? So again, here's another look at the yields from 2020 in the canola with the numbers this time. So you can see clearly there that there were none higher than the untreated control. The wheat this year, so the untreated controls come in at 4.65 tonne per hectare, pretty good crop. If you sort of just scan through there and look for ones that, oh, by the way, we got that analysed statistically, and there weren't at a 95% confidence interval, it wasn't statistically significant, any of the treatments. So even this 5.07 compared to 4.65, statistically anyway, wasn't different to the untreated control. And look, when you look at that treatment, it was 2 litres per tonne on the canola last year and 4 litres per tonne last year. And when you do the calculations on that, it's a really small amount of SC14 from the year before. You would not have thought that would be giving you any benefit 12 months later. And then if you look at a couple of the other higher treatments, this is where it is interesting. Okay, we think the 2 litres behind the time of SC14 and the 4 litres would be one of the good ones, and look at saying that there. But like I said, there's that much variability and that much going on there. There's no way we could be confident that the treatment is the reason we're seeing the differences there. Even the BASF that didn't appear to give much of a difference last year could be a little bit, compared to the untreated control. It's at 240 kilos. And again, there's another one of the on-seed treatments there, which did have a litre behind the press wheel. But again, 1 litre of SC14 a year later, wouldn't have thought you'd have a lot of residual value in that. So conclusions. Basically, we found that seeding on row or near row significantly improved germination and early biomass, and also grain yield. Or I shouldn't say significant for grain yield, because it just said we couldn't come up with that with the statistics. And really, seed placement was much more important than any of the wetter treatments. So the ProTracker and other sorts of equipment like that can help you control where that seeder bar is exactly and get it close to last year's row. I think it was barley in 2019, so canola on a cereal row certainly worked really well in this case. And the other thing that I think, despite everything going on, that we can be pretty confident on was that the SC14 was much more effective when it was placed near the seed compared to placing the same rate on the surface behind the press wheel. And we couldn't provide any evidence to say that yes, there is residual benefit from wetter applied, from the year before, but I think that's something that needs to continue to be investigated, because if farmers are seeing it and having that gut feel, I think it's really possible. So this is almost where we go to the telly infomercial, but wait, there's more, and we've got the extra set of steak knives there. Funding, we only had funding to sort of do that basic analysis from GRDC in the second year of that trial in 2021. But we had farmers keen to test a few more things off their own bat, which we really love at Sinister Coast. So we were only too happy to help set up the trial and analyse the data, etc. So thanks to Pete Van Zyl and Trevor Hanig from First Australian Farmland. So this particular block was on Johnson Road in Palmdale. And as you can see, what they've done there is compared 3 litres of SC14 with a new product from Poor Farmers called Aquifer, so 3 litres of that with an untreated control. So very sandy, non-wetting soil. Acidity is probably there, but they've been liming, so it'll be coming up. Really big plots, so 36 metres wide, so 3 seeder widths wide and 3 harvester widths, and then that's been replicated 3 times. So we ended up for each treatment effectively having 9 strips that were 1.8 kilometres long. So that whole particular trial site, I think it works out at about 58 hectares. So really interesting to look at. Would have been nice if we didn't have a really, really wet year and lakes in our trial, but can't control that when you put these things in May. So the on-farm weather station, which is only 2 kilometres away, recorded 808 millimetres for 2021. Interestingly, this Google Earth image was taken from 2017, and that was probably, if you think of the last few years for the locals, the next wettest year compared to 2021. It wouldn't be anywhere near as wet as 2021, but you can still see these water points, these pooled lakes in there. And Phil, we'll get into it in a second, has been able to break down those 1.8K strips into different production zones. So when we just did the quick and dirty, so it was in Bali in 2021, if you just looked at the whole length of the strips and ignored the different soil types and the water and all the rest of it, possibly something in there, it's subtle, but the untreated control average 4.9 tonne per hectare, the SC 14 5.16, and the aquifer 5.01. But you have to acknowledge there's a lot of variation in there. So Phil broke it down a bit, and he came up with looking at these 3 different sections, and then we sort of looked at the means of these. So this northern part we call the north high performing. I haven't shown you the yield map stuff, but yeah, it was all based on what the yield map stuff came up with. We have a south high performing and a south poor performing. And I just wanted to highlight to you so you can see it here. You can see in this poor performing that it looks like, despite it all being sand, this being an even lighter, whiter, probably non-wetting sand in this section. So we split into those 3 zones. And you have a look. Now the data is a bit all over the place. So if you look at that high performing area in the north, you know, we're nudging over 5.5 tonne to 6. The 2 wetting treatments according to that, which I haven't analysed, we haven't analysed yet to see if it's significant, are saying it's slightly lower than the untreated control. I would be pretty confident in saying that that is just natural variation. You go to that south high performing zone, so still a 5 tonne crop. Yeah, no difference there between using the wetters and the untreated. But where we did sort of raise our eyebrows is in that, you know, poor performing zone. So you can see that sand again. We got this data here. So the untreated was 3.76. So, you know, the averages are way down on even just above it there. And then the aquifer 4.18 and the SC 14 4.32. So that was an interesting result. So what we're concluding is obviously a very wet year. You wouldn't think you would get as good a response to soil wetters, you know, in a basically a decile 10 year. But that's what we got. So we looked at it. We're still looking at the data, and we may even sort of employ the help of Saggy West to go through that. To see what we can do. Results are mixed, but in that poor performing zone, you know, there was a 420 kilo increase in barley yield for the aquifer and 560 for the SC 14. I definitely think, not that I'd hang my hat on one result alone, but I definitely think that's worth investigating further. And potentially we redo those strips exactly as they are, and or we maybe target some of those sort of really porous sands. With Pete's help at First Australian Farmland, we might be able to, you know, see if we can replicate that result again in another year, and hopefully a year that's not as wet. I guess the obvious thing that comes to mind is, if, you know, could we target the applications of the wetter through precision ag tools or whatever, or even just looking at Google Earth and picking zones to get that average cost of wetter down per hectare, but obviously not lose the benefit of using it. So quite a few acknowledgements here. Obviously, thank you for the GRDC for investing in the project, and Southern Dirt, who are the project leads, but invited SCF to partner with us. So that was more to do with the, well, 100% to do with the site with Michael Webster. So thank you to Michael and his family for their contribution at the Tenterden trial. As you can see, there was a little bit of hassle on seeding day there back in 2020, getting all those different treatments done, and a bit of patience. And that was where most of the work was done. Thanks to Pete Van Zyl and Trevor Hannig from First Australian Farmland for setting up this 2021 trial. Hopefully we can do some more. It wasn't too painful, I don't think. Thank you to 4 farmers for donating the aquifer product to look at. And then Phil Honey for playing around with this yield data in the last couple of days. I should also mention Michael Webster also did a trial at their Kenton block, so different property, not just looking at a product from Elders and their C14 and some untreated controls. And Phil is in the process, once he gets back from a little break, of looking at those as well. So we'll probably write up that as a report as part of our trials review booklet, which will be out in May sometime. So yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to give me a call or Phil a call. All our numbers, etc., are on the SCF website. And there will be more information on all of these projects, but this one particularly in our trials review booklet, which will be coming out soon. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll catch up with you soon.